The exposure meter. So far, we have learned how to manage the light entering the camera by controlling the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO. From now on, when I refer to the three main values, these are what I am referring to. But what values should we set to get a correctly exposed photograph? How do we know if our photograph is going to be under or overexposed? Well, fortunately, your camera has an exposure meter. It is exactly what it says it is. It is a meter that will let you know how dark or light your exposure, hence your photograph, is going to be. It will check the values you have set for your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO, and then it will indicate to you by means of a scale on your camera screen what level of exposure to expect when you take a photograph. If it shows your photograph is going to be under or overexposed, then it is up to you to alter one of the three main values so that it indicates that your photograph will be correctly exposed. Note, it won't always get it right, more about that later. You can alter the aperture, the shutter speed, or the ISO to do this. It is up to you which one. We will look into this in more detail later. For now, let us look at the exposure meter and see how the scale works. I have highlighted the exposure meter to show you where it is and what it looks like. It consists of a little scale. At one end of the scale, on the left, there is a minus symbol. At the other end, on the right, there is a plus symbol, and in the middle, hovering above the scale, is a 0. The meter is read by looking at the black bars under the scale. As you change any of the three main values, you will notice the number of black bars increasing or decreasing in one of the two directions, left or right, depending on which values you change. In the above image, the little black bars stretch from the 0 towards the minus sign. This indicates that if you took a photograph with these settings, it would be underexposed. If the bars stretch towards the plus sign, your photograph will be overexposed. If there are no bars at all except the single one below the 0, then your camera is telling you that you can expect a good exposure. Please note, this meter is more of a guide, as you will learn later. It doesn't always indicate the exposure that you may prefer. You do not have to press a button to make this meter work. It continuously alters depending on whatever values you set and how much light is available. Most importantly, you can only see the exposure meter when the camera mode is set to manual. Note the M on the above screen. The other modes, A, S and P, are semi-auto modes where you set one or two of the values, and the camera works out the other value or values for you, to give you a correct exposure. Even the ISO has an auto feature on some DSLRs. If you select one of these other modes, then the exposure meter isn't needed and it will disappear off the screen. Try changing the mode to A, S, or P and watch it disappear. A handy feature is the fact you can see the exposure meter as you look through the viewfinder. The camera exposure meter introducing the light meter. For your exposure meter to do its job, it needs to know 4 things. 3 of these things you know about: the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO values. The exposure meter takes into account the 3 values you set, but it can't give you a result unless it knows how much light there is. That is the 4th thing it needs to know. It can only work out if our main 3 values will give us a good exposure, if it knows how much light is in the scene we are photographing or how well lit an object is that we are pointing our camera at. This is why the camera has a built-in light meter. Before we start taking photographs, I think it is best to have a quick look at the light meter's basic setting. We can look at the light meter's more advanced settings later. The light meter. When your camera's light meter takes a reading of how much light is available, it will feed that information to the exposure meter so that your camera can work out if your photo is going to be over or underexposed. It will indicate its findings on the exposure meter scale. In this picture, you can see the symbol for the light meter highlighted. This symbol denotes that the camera is set in matrix metering mode. There are different symbols for different metering modes, which we will look at later. For now, note that this symbol represents the matrix metering mode. This means that the light meter is taking into account all the light it can see in the whole frame. In other words, everything you can see through the viewfinder. It will work out an average reading of all the light, taking into account the dark areas and light areas it sees, and then it will hand that information to the exposure meter, which in turn will indicate the expected exposure on the exposure meter. It doesn't always get it perfectly right though. Matrix metering can be a bit off because of various factors like something very bright in the frame or an area that is very dark, and because of this we are provided with other light metering modes that enable us to be more precise. Use your camera controls to choose matrix metering for now, and we will look at the alternative metering modes later. Don't forget to subscribe.